Hello and welcome to this contractor information sessions about the changes to regulation related to advertising for licensed contractors. Today, we're going to walk you through some information about what are the changes, who they apply to, why they were created, what we heard from contractors about those changes and how to implement them most effectively, the guidelines that were created to support implementation, and Technical Safety BC's plans for public communication around these changes. We'll also share some information on who you can get in touch with if you have remaining questions. This effort was started a number of years ago at the request of contractors to enable them to differentiate themselves from unlicensed contractors that were advertising illegally. So the process began to create new legislation that allowed licensed contractors only to advertise their services. Over the past number of years, we've gone through a number of research activities to identify how we can best implement regulatory changes like this. We've looked at other jurisdictions, other professional organizations, and found that there are some common and useful ways to implement changes like this. What's resulted is the regulation change that's in place today and the supporting guidelines that have been created. We're now in a process of communicating those changes to the contractor community, and we'll shortly begin to communicate those changes more broadly to the public as those guidelines and regulatory changes come into effect over the next 14 to 16 months. There are three changes to this process. One is to the Safety Standards Act itself, which is already in effect, which makes it illegal for anybody without a contractor's license to advertise regulated services. If they do, those individuals are now subject to monetary penalties. So this is a great tool that enables the safety system to more effectively hold those operating outside of it more accountable. The second regulatory change is the Safety Standards General Regulation. This has come into effect on September 6, 2022, and now requires that every contractor identify their company name and their Technical Safety BC license number in all advertising. This may not be practical for all contractors to implement. Therefore, Technical Safety BC has developed a set of guidelines intended to support contractors to interpret our technical safety's expectations and to create some consistency in how license numbers are advertised in the future. These guidelines are phased in over time, allowing contractors time to phase in different forms of advertising over the next 16 months. The changes apply to all licensed contractors in all technologies except for rail, and it prohibits the ability of any unlicensed contractor to advertise. All contractors that advertise services must follow these regulations, and all contractors, regardless of size, whether they are a sole proprietor or a multinational company, the regulation applies to all companies performing regulated work in BC. If you do not advertise, if your company does not advertise today, the regulations and the guidelines do not require that you start advertising, only that you reflect your license number on any advertising that you already do. The primary intention of these changes were to deter unlicensed contractors for advertising regulatory services and to make it more visible if they are not licensed to the public. For licensed contractors, we've heard that there's a lot of value in displaying your license number, and that this change should enable us to publish Technical Safety BC's name and your license number, creating value for yourselves and for the public. The changes also enable Technical Safety BC to more easily take enforcement action against unlicensed contractors that are advertising, where previously more investigation would have been required. Simply advertising warrants an investigation in the future. We heard from contractors on two separate occasions. One was at the beginning of the consultation process prior to the regulatory change to gauge the acceptance and support of these changes. We experienced very high support for the changes that were proposed, and companies of all different sizes participated in this work. If you were not able to participate in this work, we encourage you to reach out and find out ways that you can engage with future regulatory consultations. In 2022, once the regulatory changes were in place and already defined, The organization went through an engagement process to learn from contractors how these changes can be best implemented and how a set of guidelines might support them in consistently applying those changes. So we heard some things from contractors, including that a set of guidelines that was as detailed as possible or made practical would be helpful, that the guidelines should be the same for everyone, regardless of technology or the size of the company or the number of jurisdictions that they work in, that the guidelines should cover all types of advertising, from social media and digital marketing through to company documents and other types of assets used in marketing, including vehicles. And that those guidelines should be phased in over time to allow contractors the time to understand the changes and to make the easiest changes first, and the more complex and potentially more cost impacting changes later. There's strong emphasis placed on public communication and public awareness of these changes so that the public knows to look for license numbers in contractor advertising as a way to determine who is a legitimate licensed contractor and who is not. Enforcement against unlicensed contractors would be a good focus. Contractors expressed that holding industry accountable for those players who are operating outside of the safety system was the primary interest of any compliance and enforcement activity. So rather than enforcing directly against licensed contractors that are already playing within the safety system, the focus of enforcement was asked to be on unlicensed contractors. So we've taken these themes into our implementation plan and have moved ahead. So the guidelines themselves provide guidance and recommendations to align with the regulatory requirements. The guidelines themselves are not requirements and are not enforceable directly. However, the regulation is enforceable directly and is much more broad than the guidelines. So they're meant to be informative versus prescriptive. There's certainly no way in a set of guidelines that we can identify every potential situation for advertising. So we hope the contractors take these guidelines as a recipe for determining what makes the most sense for their company, given your own advertising activities. So the guidelines translate the regulation into more practical terms and are meant to identify blanket exemptions to the regulation so that multiple exemptions aren't asked for that are consistent across industry. So you will see in the guidelines that there are certain activities that are exempt from these requirements to publish your company name and license number in your advertising work. It certainly clarifies Technical Safety BC's expectations, and it's helpful for our staff to interact with you and provide you with consistent set of information on what Technical Safety BC's expectations are around advertising guidelines. It'll also underpin some of the communication that we do with the public around where they should look for licensed contractors' numbers in their advertising. So this will be used in public communications as well. So displaying your license number, and just for clarity, we're talking about your Technical Safety BC license number, not your certified worker number or your business license numbers. This is the number that you were issued as a licensed contractor from Technical Safety BC, and it comes in the format of L, and there'll be 2 more letters, XX, depending on your technology, and 7 more digits. Every contractor in Technical Safety BC system has a number like this. If you have any questions about what your number is, please get in touch with us. The regulations require that you include your company name as shown on your business license and your license number in this particular format. The format is intended to create consistency across contractors. If you have a license number that is perhaps 5 or 6 digits long, you'll notice that in Technical Safety BC systems and your interactions with us, you'll see likely to prefix zeros before your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 number. If you have multiple licenses for multiple different technologies or different scopes of work, as long as they point to the same name of your contracting company, then you can choose one of your licenses to use as your primary in your advertising efforts. You can choose the relevant license number for the relevant kind of advertising that you're doing, or you can choose to use all of your license numbers in all of your advertising. This is a choice up to you. And we've done this because we recognize that it may not be practical for companies that have multiple license numbers to include them all in your advertising. So we've tried to compromise, and as long as that license number points back to a consistent company name, that's suitable in this case. Exemptions are enabled under the regulation. So with a safety manager may provide an exemption to a regulatory requirement. This means that we will not be providing exemptions to the guidelines. An exemption would be to the overall requirement of having to publish your company name and license number. So we hope that the guidelines provide that clarity around what our expectations are so that fewer exemptions are needed. If you feel that you have a unique situation which makes it unpractical to advertise according to the regulations, there is a process that you can begin by inquiring with enforcement at technicalsafetybc.ca to determine if this is a good process to go through. Technical Safety BC will be taking a reasonable person approach to future compliance and enforcement rather than looking at each individual instance of advertising compliance. So this means if you're making a reasonable attempt to comply with the regulation through the guidelines, that's a great start, and we're not going to be looking at every single piece of paper for compliance. It's not a good use of your time or of ours, and really what we're looking for is public recognition of your license number on your advertising materials. So as mentioned, Technical Safety BC will support licensed contractors to understand these changes. We'll help educate on what requirements make the most sense for your company. We're happy to answer questions and work through any questions that you might have with you. Our compliance and enforcement activities will be focused on identifying and investigating unlicensed contractors that are advertising, beginning with the first phase of the guidelines, which includes digital advertising. So Technical Safety BC is currently working on its implementation plan for how it will identify and investigate unlicensed contractors, and is building out the processes to do so. Once the guidelines are fully phased in, there may be some compliance activity for licensed contractors just to increase the visibility of license numbers in the marketplace overall. Certainly, the more contractors that comply with these regulatory changes and align with the guidelines, the more visibility there will be for Technical Safety BC and for licensed contractors as an industry overall, creating more value for everybody. The guidelines are going to be phased in over 3 phases, beginning in January 2023 with the first phase around digital advertising. So the guidelines identify a number of digital advertising channels. They're pretty standard, and identify the suggested recommendations for where you place your license number on each of those channels. I suggest looking through those guidelines in detail. They are fairly complete, and they are a good source of ongoing information. Phase 2 will begin in the fall of next year, 2023, and that will include having your license number on documents, signage, any publications, written or electronic, TV, radio, ads, etc. So we're looking for license numbers on quotes, invoices, etc., letterhead, things that your clients are going to likely see. And again, taking the reasonable person approach, we understand that many contractors have stocks of stationery, of business cards, and that over time, those changes may be made to include license numbers. But we're certainly targeting a date of September 30th, if at all possible and practical for your company. Phase 3 begins in January 2024 and includes more significant company assets, such as vehicles. The requirements for displaying your license number on your vehicles are detailed in the guidelines and include having your number either on the back of your vehicle or on both sides if your company vehicle is branded. If it is not branded, there is no requirement for your license number to be present. Similarly, we are not requiring that personal use vehicles contain license numbers. There are more details in the guidelines around that, and please feel free to contact us if you have questions around how these guidelines are implemented over time. Storefront signage refers to displaying your Technical Safety BC license number, similarly to how you might display a business license number. So we're certainly not looking for new signage on your building, new awnings. We're simply looking for the display of your license number and with your company name somewhere on a storefront, if that is your place of business. Here's an example of the guidelines for phase 1. They're fairly straightforward in terms of listing the forms of advertising that Technical Safety BC recommends you consider, and the guidance and recommendations on how and where to place your license number. It also identifies channels that are exempt from needing to display or communicate your license number. These guidelines are currently stored on Technical Safety BC's Engage website at that address there on the screen. For public communications, we plan to begin public communications around the new requirements for the public to take a look and see if they're advertising for licensed contractors that they are seeking out to hire, to check and see if license numbers are present. If not, we'll be providing some information to the public for how to check if a contractor has a license number. There is a tool on Technical Safety BC's website called the Find a Licensed Contractor Lookup that will currently be reissued and now called the Public Registry. So you may find it under either name, but that is a lookup tool that contains every licensed contractor in Technical Safety BC's system. So you can go and check it out yourself and find yourself and see how you're displayed on those lookup tools. But that will be the primary link that we'll be sharing with the public to validate that a contractor is licensed to perform regulated work. We will continue broader communications around this and tie it in with other public awareness activities and campaigns that Technical Safety BC has planned. This is just one tool in the toolkit to help the public understand the value of hiring a licensed contractor and the risks of not doing that. There's some key takeaways from this presentation and some things to keep in mind. These are items that you might just want to note down or talk to your teams about. These are the key items that Technical Safety BC wants you to know about the regulatory changes. So let's give you a moment to read those. Number 8 below refers to the report an incident hotline. This is an existing process in place that allows anybody, a licensed contractor, a member of the public, et cetera, to report something that isn't quite right. So if you as a contractor identify a potential contractor that is operating and advertising without a license, you can use this report an incident tool to notify Technical Safety BC of those instances, just like the public can use this tool to identify potentially unlicensed contractors that are advertising. This is an existing channel. It's a great channel to use. We encourage more use of it for this purpose. And for more information on the guidelines, all the supporting documentation, the consultation results, and the legislative changes themselves, you can read more information at the Technical Safety BC Engage website at the link below in number 9. So I mentioned those are 2 great resources, the Technical Safety BC Engage site on the left and the report and incident link via the Technical Safety BC's public website on the right. If you have questions and want to get in touch with us and learn more about how these changes impact your company, you can email us at contact@technicalsafetybc.ca, or you can call our client care center at 1-866-566-7233. Thank you very much for your time today. We really appreciate you tuning in to learn more about the advertising changes for licensed contractors. I'm good to see you. Thank you for being here.